And, that hardened my nose. And I would say that people have said I've been the tip of the spear in showing the world that Canada is being used as the new southern border to run drugs into the greatest democracy in the world and the greatest consumer basis for drugs in the world. That's America.
Why is it? Why is it that Canada is, like you said, a global hub for transnational crime? Why do you think Canada has become kind of that hub for organized and foreign interference? What is it about it?
There's a lot of things going on, but first of all, it's an uninformed Canadian public that, like me, they grew up just thinking, I'd put it this way. There's a lot of attitude like, America is kind of like the big brother that gets up to, a lot of wars around the world. And so Canadian people kind of like quietly resentful about that. They know they're not as rich or powerful. And yet they held on to this image that Canada was free of crime, or that Canada had upright systems that weren't, vulnerable to corruption. And, as a consequence of that, we have laws that, just to cut to the chase, we don't even have a racketeering law in Canada. Essentially, I think now, from corruption reasons, that is, there's a whole legal and political industry that's just, getting rich off allowing money laundering and crime. But, the Canadian public hasn't been pushing for like hardcore, anti-crime, anti-money laundering laws like the United States has. So, the worst threat networks in the world. So the Chinese Communist Party, the Mexican cartels, Iranian threat networks, Hezbollah, of course, Italian organized crime. You cracked down on it in New York City with the RICO Act. It came up to Canada. So we're just wide open. And yet the Canadian public, I say, the smart ones are willfully blind to it. We're still benefiting from sky high real estate prices that aren't supported by real incomes. And too many of the population, as I say, is just completely ignorant to the fact that Mexican cartels, as the more brutal end, as they're embedded around the world. They're extremely sophisticated. But as I say, they're being used at a higher level by the Chinese Communist Party. And the Chinese Communist Party, their home base for Western Hemisphere is in Canadian cities. That's partly due to our huge, mostly honest diaspora population, but deeply infiltrated by Chinese spies, gangsters that are used by the party.
Man, that's interesting. You can interview multiple people from Canada and they'll all have different views, but most of the investigative journalism experts that I've interviewed that focus on the cartel and drugs, like they all say the same. Like it's a hotbed, but there's still people in Canada who don't believe it. There's still people in Canada that are like, oh, there's no way there's fentanyl coming through Canada. It's all through the southern border. And I'm like, I mean, look, I don't know the Canadian border very well, but I do know how porous it is and how challenging it is. And for me, if I was the opposition, I would be using the Canadian border.
Well, yeah, you know it as well as anyone. The cartels will kill for border access, and that's why they're terror organizations. That's why they hang, dozens of people off bridges to tell people in certain towns, this is ours, this is our border. Because as you know, and I'm kind of frustrated with it. The Canadians that are denying, like, think about it. Every business person, in the world wants the American market. Why would the cartels be any different? And as you know, the American government has basically got military on the southern border, but for a good 20 years, the cartels have been setting up in a more sophisticated way along the northern border. And our government has just kept our public in the dark. So in a way, I got to think about it this way. I've developed trust over the past 10, 15 years where people at high levels in Canada and the United States will talk to me off the record and say, like, you're really onto it. So you got to help tell people what's going on because your laws need to change. Rest of the Canadian public, 99.99%, don't have the benefit of knowing what I know. So I'm kind of like, people that come from law enforcement. In a way, it's a troubling, it's almost, you've got a public job to do, But that darkness, you've got to chase it down. You got to keep it in your mind, and then you got to spit out the real facts to convince the liars and the ignorant people out there that, yeah, look, people that are denying the cartels are flooding our borders now. And it's even greater since Justin Trudeau knocked out the visa requirement for Mexico in 2018. I mean, if we don't get on this, and we're already not on it, we're going to start to see, and we already have, machine gun battles in our streets like Mexico. And so, yeah, I would say a big part of my job in my life for the past 10 years has been teaching Canadian people that the Chinese Communist Party is using Canada and using us deeply. I've been pretty successful in that. And in the last year or two, I'm showing how the cartel works hand in hand. You know, they are so profitable, and they'll do what the Chinese Communist Party needs them to do. I believe they'll be involved in intelligence gathering for, you know, Iran and China, because it's, and I can back that up in terms of the encryption technology hubs that the Sinaloa Cartel set up in Canada, again, as a weak spot, will blow people's mind. That's how deep it goes.
How did let me hit that real quick. I'm curious about that. What do you mean by that? They've created encrypted communication hubs out there in Canada?
Yeah. So I'll try to be really quick on this. I wrote a book in 2021 called Willful Blindness, and it told the story of how RCMP's top intelligence official was selling Five Eyes targeting and operational plans to encryption technology companies set up in Vancouver. So we had like 5 or 6 encryption technology companies using servers, based off of hacked BlackBerry handsets, as you know, BlackBerry, Canadian technology. And to cut to the chase, this dirty Mountie RCMP intelligence official was telling these encryption handset runners in Vancouver that America and Australia mainly was targeting them because Hezbollah was using those sets. Sinaloa Cartel is using those handsets. The Chinese triads are using them. And so this is what I mean when I call Vancouver, some of my friends call it a forward operational technology hub used by the triads. Remember what Kash Patel pointed to, Chinese Communist Party, Iran, and the cartels. They're using Vancouver as a weak spot technology base. And Chapo Guzman, you can read this, I'll do more on it, literally had servers set up in Vancouver. This is a big way of how law enforcement eventually got him. They got onto his servers and they started to be able to read their handsets. But I mean, I could go on and on. As I say, I've got a chapter in the book, but literally out of Vancouver, Chapo Guzman's got encryption technology. It's used at the same time by the highest level Hezbollah money launderers in the world, who are also using Canadian banks and using them easily. So this is what I mean. It goes back to your first question. The cartels and the Chinese and Iranian threat networks have used Canadian banks, law offices, real estate, and technology easily. And this is a big reason why, the cartels are set up so strong here now.
That's incredible. And what book was that? So our listeners can go check that out. That one specifically?
Yeah, it's called Willful Blindness, How a Network of Chinese Communist Party narcos, agents, and tycoons infiltrated the West. And at the end of the day, that story told about how something called the Vancouver model of money laundering, I'm the one that informed the world about it. It's big it's well known in the States now. This is stories about how the DEA and the RCMP before them figured out that Chinese money brokers, as you know, set up around the world, are collecting the cash for the cartels. They're collecting it for all organized crime. They're storing it in, nail salons, underground casinos, and there's rich Chinese people worldwide that bid on that cash, and move it around the world. And then ultimately, for our part of the story, this is moved back for the cartels. How it works is people in China will buy a bunch of Sinaloa cash in New York. There'll be a shipment of, let's say, fake Nikes from China into Mexico. Those will be sold for the pesos. And that's how, as I say, the Chinese Communist Party has set up this whole system to launder those funds. So I'm the one that first told the world about this story in Willful Blindness 2021.
That's insane.